everyone. Welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at something kind of unsettling, like
Oh,
the paradox of grassroots movements.
okay.
We're going to be exploring how these groups
Uh-huh.
that are often seen as, forces for good
Right.
can sometimes
Yeah.
bump up against individual liberties.
Interesting.
And to help us unpack all of this, we have our expert
Hi.
here ready to get started.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a fascinating area to explore,
Oh,
Like
yeah.
we often think of grassroots movements as, like agents of positive change, right?
Yeah.
Fighting for equality, giving a voice to those who haven't been heard.
Yeah.
But there's a flip side to that coin.
Oh,
It's worth examining.
okay, so let's talk about that flip side. Where does the paradox part come in?
Hmm.
What makes this so complicated?
Well, think about it this way. Have you ever felt pressured to agree with a popular opinion, even if you had reservations? Like maybe on social media.
Yeah,
Everyone's rallying behind a cause,
totally.
and you hesitate to speak up, but you don't want to be the odd one out.
Oh, totally. Like that feeling when you're at a party
Yes.
and everyone's raving about a band,
Yes.
you secretly think is kind of overrated.
Exactly.
You just nod along.
Exactly. Now magnify that to a larger scale.
Yes. Okay.
Sometimes the passion and the energy of a movement
Yeah.
can create an atmosphere where dissenting voices are quickly silenced.
Right.
Even if those voices are raising legitimate concerns,
Yeah.
it becomes less about open discussion
Right.
and more about maintaining a unified front, even if that means shutting down critical thought.
Wow. That makes a lot of sense. So how does that actually play out in real life?
Yeah,
Are there any examples from history that illustrate this paradox?
definitely. One of the most striking examples is the Prohibition movement in the United States.
Okay.
This movement,
yeah.
driven by a desire to improve society by reducing alcohol consumption, ended up pushing for strict legal restrictions that, while well-intentioned,
Right.
limited personal choice and sparked unintended negative consequences like the rise of organized crime.
Wow. It's amazing how something that seems so positive on the surface can have these unintended consequences.
Right.
I'm starting to understand how tricky this whole issue is.
Mm-hmm.
Are there more modern examples of this paradox in action?
Absolutely. Yeah. Let's take the recent debates around mandatory public health measures, for instance.
Okay.
On one hand,
Right.
you have the collective good argument,
Yeah.
protecting the vulnerable and preventing the spread of disease.
Right.
But on the other hand,
Yeah.
you have concerns about individual autonomy and the right to make personal choices about one's health.
Right. I see how those two perspectives can
Yeah.
clash. It's like everyone's coming from a good place, but figuring out where to draw the line gets super complicated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this tension between collective good and individual liberties
Okay.
pops up in various movements.
Right.
Whether it's advocating for stricter environmental regulations,
Mm-hmm.
promoting specific dietary choices,
Wow.
or even shaping educational curriculums.
Oh.
The source material we have today, The Paradox of Grassroots Movements, dives deep into how this tension plays out in different contexts.
It's fascinating how even with something like choosing what to eat or how to educate our kids,
Right.
these same forces can come into play. So these movements start with good intentions.
Yeah.
But how do they end up actually restricting individual liberties?
Mm.
What are the mechanisms at work here?
Well, one key factor is the rise of what we might call ideological policing,
Okay.
where individuals feel pressured to conform to the movement's beliefs, even if they have private reservations.
Ideological policing. That's a powerful term. Can you give us a concrete example of what that might look like? I'm
Yeah.
having a hard time picturing it.
Imagine a scenario where someone expresses a slightly different viewpoint on, say, climate change solutions
Okay.
within a group dedicated to environmental activism.
Okay.
Instead of engaging in open debate, that person is immediately labeled a denier
Uh-huh.
and ostracized from the group.
Oh, wow.
Their opinion dismissed without consideration,
Yeah.
and they're afraid of being labeled or excluded, which prevents them from expressing themselves freely.
Oh, wow. I can see how that could be really stifling, especially for someone who genuinely cares about the cause, but maybe doesn't agree with every single aspect of the movement's approach.
Right.
It's almost like being forced to choose between your own thoughts and belonging to the group.
Exactly.
Wow.
It's that pressure to conform,
Yeah.
that fear of being ostracized, that can ultimately lead to the suppression of individual liberties.
Okay.
It's not always about overt force or coercion.
Right.
It can be much more subtle and insidious.
Okay, this is getting pretty intense. It sounds like navigating the space requires a lot of careful thought and awareness.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
And the challenge becomes even more pronounced when we consider the influence of social media.
Right.
These platforms can be powerful tools for mobilizing support and raising awareness.
Yeah.
But they can also amplify this phenomenon of ideological policing
Right.
and create a sort of mob mentality that can target individuals for their words or beliefs.
Social media is a whole other can of worms.
Yeah.
You're right, it can be used for good,
Right.
but it can also be really scary when it turns on someone.
Exactly. And as we dive deeper into this topic, we'll explore how these dynamics play out in the digital age and what that means for both movements and individuals.
This is a lot to take in, but it's incredibly important.
Yeah.
I'm already starting to rethink how I approach these issues.
Good. Yeah, it really makes you step back and think, doesn't it?
It does.
And as we move further into this deep dive,
Yeah.
I think it's important to acknowledge that not all movements are created equal.
Right.
Some operate with more transparency
Yeah.
and respect for dissenting voices than others.
Right. That's a good point. It's easy to paint all movements with a broad brush.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of nuance here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's why the paradox of grassroots movements
Okay.
emphasizes the importance of critical thinking.
Yeah.
Not just about the cause itself,
Right.
but also about how a movement is going about achieving its goals.
Okay, so how can we as individuals become more discerning
Yeah.
about the movements we choose to support or engage with?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it's something we should all be thinking about.
Right.
One red flag is a lack of transparency.
Yeah, okay.
If a movement is secretive about its funding sources, its internal decision-making processes, or its methods for achieving its goals,
Yeah.
that's a cause for concern.
Transparency is so crucial.
Yeah.
It's like, how can you trust a movement if you don't know where their money's coming from or
Right.
how they're operating behind the scenes?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Another red flag is the use of overly aggressive or emotionally manipulative tactics. Think about those online campaigns that rely on guilt trips,
Huh?
shaming, or fear-mongering
Right.
to get people to donate or sign petitions.
Okay.
Those tactics might be effective in the short term,
Yeah.
but they can also erode trust and create a toxic environment.
It's like you want to support a cause because you genuinely believe in it.
Right.
Not because you're being pressured or manipulated into it.
Right.
Right.
A healthy movement should encourage thoughtful engagement, not blind obedience.
Okay. Yeah.
Another thing to consider is how a movement treats its critics.
Yeah.
Do they engage in respectful dialogue with those who hold different views?
Right.
Or do they resort to personal attacks and attempts to silence dissent?
Oh, I've definitely seen that kind of thing happen online.
Right.
It's like if you disagree even slightly with the prevailing opinion,
Yeah.
you get bombarded with insults and accusations.
Yeah.
It's really disheartening.
It is, and it's counterproductive.
Yeah.
A movement that's truly committed to positive change should be open to constructive criticism
Right.
and willing to have its ideas challenged.
Yeah.
After all, how can you improve your approach if you're not willing to listen to feedback, even if it's uncomfortable?
That's such an important point.
Yeah.
It's like even with the best of intentions, a movement can get things wrong.
Yeah.
And if no one's willing to speak up and say, hey, maybe this isn't the best way to go about this,
Right.
then those mistakes can get amplified and end up doing more harm than good.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's why it's so important to cultivate a culture of open dialogue and critical thinking,
Okay.
even within movements we support.
So it's not about blindly following a leader or accepting everything a movement says at face value.
Right.
It's about being an active participant, asking tough questions,
Yeah.
and being willing to challenge the status quo even within a group you identify with.
Precisely.
Okay.
It's about being an informed and engaged citizen,
Yeah.
not just a passive follower.
This is starting to feel a bit more empowering.
Good.
Like we actually have agency in all of this.
Right.
It's not just about being swept along by the tide of whatever movement happens to be trending at the moment.
It's about recognizing that we all have a responsibility to think critically,
Yeah.
to engage in respectful dialogue,
Yeah.
and to hold both movements and ourselves accountable to higher standards.
So open dialogue, critical thinking, being mindful of how we engage online. Any other tips for navigating this tricky terrain?
Well, this might sound a bit counterintuitive.
Okay.
But sometimes a healthy dose of skepticism can be helpful.
Okay.
Not cynicism,
Right.
but a willingness to question assumptions,
Okay.
to look beyond the surface,
Right.
and to be aware of the potential for unintended consequences.
Skepticism as in don't believe everything you read on the internet.
More like, don't just accept something as true because it's being presented as the right or moral position.
Right.
Do your own research.
Yeah.
Consider different perspectives and be willing to change your mind if the evidence warrants it.
That's a good reminder.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get caught up in the emotional appeal of a movement.
Right.
And to overlook potential flaws or unintended consequences.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is where the concept of individual liberties comes back into play.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that even when a movement is pursuing a goal we might agree with,
Right.
it's crucial to ensure that their methods don't infringe on the fundamental rights of others.
So it's not just about the ends.
Yeah.
It's also about the means. It's about ensuring that the pursuit of a greater good doesn't trample on individual freedoms in the process.
Precisely.
Wow.
It's about finding that delicate balance between collective action and individual liberty,
Right.
between pursuing a common goal and respecting the diversity of opinions and perspectives within a society.
This conversation has been really eye-opening for me.
Good.
I'm starting to see how complex and nuanced this whole issue is.
It is complex, and it's something we all need to be grappling with.
Yeah.
Especially in today's world where information spreads so rapidly and social pressure can be so intense.
Yeah. It's like we need a whole new set of tools and strategies for navigating this landscape.
But we do, and that's what we'll explore further as we continue our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll look at specific examples of how this paradox plays out in different contexts.
Right.
And we'll discuss practical steps you can take to be a more informed and engaged citizen
Okay.
while also upholding the principles of individual liberty.
This is getting me really fired up. I'm ready to dive into those practical steps.
Right.
What can we, as individuals, actually do to make a difference? All right, so we've talked about the paradox, we've identified some red flags, but now let's get down to brass tacks.
Okay.
What can we actually do to make sure we're supporting positive change without sacrificing individual liberties?
Right.
You know, like what are our action items here?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think the first step is deceptively simple.
Okay.
Be informed.
All right.
Before you jump on any bandwagon, take some time to understand the issue,
Right.
the different perspectives involved,
Yeah.
and the movement's proposed solutions.
So, like, don't just retweet a hashtag without actually knowing what it's about.
Exactly. It's easy to get caught up in the emotional appeal of a movement,
Right.
but we need to engage our critical thinking skills too.
Yeah.
Check multiple sources, look for evidence-based arguments,
Okay.
and be wary of information that seems overly simplistic or one-sided.
It's almost like being a detective, right? Following the trail of information, looking for clues,
Yeah.
and piecing together the bigger picture.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And as you're gathering information, pay attention to the language being used.
Okay.
Is it inclusive and respectful,
Yeah.
or is it divisive and demonizing?
Right.
Does it encourage open dialogue, or does it shut down dissent?
Yeah. The language a movement uses can be really telling.
Right.
It's like a window into their values and how they
Right.
view the world.
Exactly. And once you've done your research and you've formed your own opinion,
Okay.
don't be afraid to share it.
Right.
Engage in conversations. Respectfully challenge viewpoints that you disagree with,
Okay.
and be open to having your own perspective challenged as well.
Yeah. That can be scary, though, right?
Yeah.
Especially online where things can get heated so quickly.
It can be intimidating, but it's also essential for a healthy democracy.
Okay.
Remember, a diversity of opinions and perspectives
Right.
is what makes a society strong and resilient.
So even if my voice is shaking a little,
Yeah.
it's important to speak up and
It's so
contribute to the conversation.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And remember, you don't have to have all the answers
Right.
or be a perfect advocate.
Okay.
It's okay to ask questions, to admit when you don't know something,
Yeah.
and to change your mind as you learn more.
Oh, that's a relief. I was starting to feel like I needed a law degree or something
Right.
just to participate in these conversations.
Not at all.
Mm-hmm.
What matters is that you're engaging thoughtfully and respectfully.
Okay.
And remember, you're not alone in this.
Right.
There are countless others who are also trying to navigate this complex landscape.
So what about those times when you see a movement, even when you generally support, going too far or using tactics that you disagree with? What do you do then?
That's when it's time to speak up. even if it's uncomfortable.
Right.
You can voice your concerns within the movement,
Yeah.
engage in constructive criticism,
Okay.
or even choose to distance yourself from the group if you feel their actions are incompatible with your values.
That's tough. It's like calling out your own team.
You can be.
Yeah.
But remember, true loyalty isn't about blind allegiance.
Right.
It's about holding the people and organizations you care about accountable to their own stated principles.
Okay. I'm feeling a little more empowered now. It's like we have a voice and we can use it to shape these movements in a positive direction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And remember, change doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
It's a process, and it requires patience, persistence,
Okay.
and a willingness to keep learning and adapting.
So it's not about winning or losing.
Right.
It's about engaging in the long game of building a better world.
Beautifully put.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that we're all in this together.
Yeah.
And that we each have a role to play in shaping a future where collective action and individual liberties can coexist harmoniously.
This deep dive has been a real roller coaster of emotions.
Yeah.
But I'm walking away feeling more informed, more engaged, and more hopeful.
That's wonderful to hear.
Yeah.
Remember, the key is to stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.
Okay.
Your voice matters.
Right.
And your actions can make a difference.
So to our listeners out there, don't be afraid to dive into these complex issues.
Yeah.
Do your research, engage in respectful dialogue, and use your voice to champion both positive change and individual liberties.
And remember, the pursuit of a better world is a journey, not a destination.
Right.
Let's keep learning, keep questioning, and keep striving to create a society that reflects our highest values.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thank you.
Until next time, keep those minds curious and keep those conversations flowing.